Good morning and welcome to a Straight Air News live report. It is inflation day and we are just about 2 minutes away from the latest consumer price index numbers that we are going to bring to you live right here on this YouTube live stream. I want to bring in my guest this morning. It is Akin Oyedele, a deputy editor of investing over at Business Insider. Akin, thank you so much for joining me this morning. We're excited to get into the numbers about a minute away from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, bringing out what those consumer price index numbers are for June. Expectations are that prices will have gone up 3.1% over the course of the year. That is consensus. While core, which strips out food and energy, would be unchanged at 3.4%. What are you looking at before these numbers come out?
Well, thanks for having me, first of all. Definitely looking for a decline in inflation. That's really the expectation. And that would signal that the trend for inflation continues to be down instead of up, which is good news, I'm sure, for everybody. No one likes prices going up, really,
Yeah.
especially if you're on the buying side and not on the selling side. So definitely looking for a decline. And the degree to which they match expectations or not.
And while we are here on this live stream, we're going to be actively on our laptops looking at the numbers. I just had a little crash on the Bureau of Labor Statistics website. But with that said, now we do have the numbers coming out. So I'm going to be looking down as we read out these numbers. And we have some surprise to the upside here today. This is coming in better than economists expected. I don't know if you're looking at the numbers in front of you, but we are looking at 3% inflation year over year. Remember, economists expected 3.1%. And instead of the monthly prices going up month over month, economists expected prices to rise 0.1%, just a small uptick over the month. Instead, in June, for all of the items, prices went down. So we're looking at a little deflationary action here in June. Negative 0.1% for all of those items. As we're going to be looking at this spreadsheet, as you're just kind of digesting this information for the first time, what are you seeing here? What's sticking out to you?
So definitely that decline, that like you said was unexpected. And the big implication that economists are watching or talking about is, what does this mean for the Fed and for interest rates? And I just glanced at my inbox, and an economist that has been calling for rate cuts for months now, his subject line is "get on with it," basically telling the Fed, look, it's time to cut rates. And so that really is the takeaway from this, that it's very clear that inflation is falling. The Fed has successfully brought inflation down from the heights that it was at over the last couple of months. And the fact that we have a negative month on month print tells you all you need to know about what the trend is at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, this is a pretty big step down. Just in May, the headline inflation numbers for the year was 3.3%. Now to have that nice, action down to that 3% marker. Again, this is for the consumer price index. We know that the Fed's preferred inflation gauge actually is reading much lower than this at 2.6% right now. But to see that 3% and hitting that bottom mark, I mean, it would be great to finally see CPI go under that 3% mark. We've been in that 3% range, 3 to 4% for so long. But to see that negative number right there, and then if we look, it's not just the headline number, which of course includes the more volatile food and energy. But if we strip that out and look at core, which is what the Fed really pays attention to, that came in better than expected as well. They expected the core to stay unchanged from May at 3.4%, and we're looking at a 3.3% inflationary rate. And for the month, only ticking up 0.1% for those prices. So while prices are still higher than the Fed would want to see them, these are pretty positive numbers. Shelter 2 down to 5.2%. So, and for the first time in I don't even know how long, because my spreadsheet won't even go that far back, shelter did not climb a significant amount in the last month. The amount that the price for shelter, that's your rent, that's your living expense, put that roof over your head, is 0.2%, where it's been at least 0.4% month over month, which really adds up over the course of the year. So that's a huge chunk of what's coming out of people's paychecks every month. Again, more
For
good
sure.
news there. What else?
Yeah,
What
and
else is
that's
sticking out to you here?
Yeah, and that's significant because the shelter component, like you say, is it's being sticky because even though mortgage rates were up, have been up at the highest levels in decades, home prices have not fallen because we have a shortage of homes available for sale. So to still see that shelter component fall is definitely a relief. Both for people who are trying to buy homes and people who are renting or looking to renew their leases or move and things like that. I would also mention that stock market futures are higher on this print. We've seen the market perform exceptionally well in the last couple of weeks, partly on this expectation that inflation is slowing down, and that means the Fed cuts rates, and that means that there is some financial easing for American consumers, and so maybe they're able to spend a bit more and get that credit card they've been holding out on, or apply for that mortgage. So stocks are responding positively to this news, which again is just a really strong signal that the trend for inflation has in fact turned the other way, and markets are happy about it.
Yeah, and investors obviously clamoring for when that rate cut is going to be. Let's take a listen because we heard Fed Chair Jerome Powell was testifying on the Hill for 2 days this week. So we got a good amount of context from him about what his thoughts are on this. Let's hear what he said about the timing of the rate cuts.
If we loosen policy too late or too little, we could hurt economic activity. If we loosen policy too much or too soon, then we could undermine the progress on inflation. So we're very much balancing those two risks, and that's really the essence of what we're thinking about these days.
You mentioned that economist in your inbox talking about get on with it already with these rate cuts. Is the Fed, encroaching on this territory of acting a little too late? What do you think is the consensus out there as to when the Fed needs to be cutting rates?
I think after today, you're going to look, a lot of economists are going to be looking for the Fed, at least in July, so it's meeting later this month, to signal that September is a go. If Jerome Powell at the July press conference comes out, uh, you know, anything less than dovish, that's going to upset a lot of people in the markets community because it's kind of like what other evidence do you need, right? Inflation slowing. Now you have the job market slowing. We got the jobs report last Friday that showed that the unemployment rates up, the number of jobs being created is fewer than it's been in the last couple of months. So it's kind of like on both ends of your mandate, the inflation end and the labor market end, you're seeing everything you need to tell you that the high interest rates are starting to choke the economy out. And so the Fed has, it wasn't that long ago that the Fed, you know, was adamant that inflation was going to be transitory, and that ended up being egg on its face. So I think, if I were the Fed, I would, start to sort of massage the market into uh, expecting a September cut. And if, like I said, the July Fed meeting will be significant in the sense that a lot of economists and market watchers will be looking for clues that the Fed's ready to go in September.
And I laugh at that transitory comment because honestly, it actually does feel like a long time ago because we've just been sitting
Yeah,
in this high inflationary environment for so long since we were having those
yeah.
debates about whether this was going to be transitory or whether it was in fact entrenched. But to your point,
Mhm.
what we're seeing coming out of the job market is a bigger slowdown, I think, than the Fed had anticipated. We look at their summary of projections they released at their last meeting, and we've
Mhm.
already hit the unemployment rate that they thought they would hit by the end of the year. So that's
Right.
4.1%. And historically very low. I try to explain this in some of my reports. We need to zoom out a little bit because we just had, a 50-year low in unemployment. So
Mhm,
4.1% is not high by any means, but certainly when we
mhm,
continue to get this data month over month, and then we're seeing the revisions come down. We're getting sometimes a couple months ago that hot jobs report, 272,000 jobs added. That turned out not to be the case.
mhm,
That was revised way down. And so we had 2 months of revisions down. So certainly not as much
mhm.
labor activity. Powell did talk about that this week as well when he was talking about the data that he was looking at when being questioned by Senator Bill Haggerty over in Tennessee. Let's take a listen to that.
Can you give us any color as to what it is you're looking for in the data and how long it might take us to get there?
We need just to see more good inflation data. That's all. We had 7 months of good inflation data at the end of last year. Then we had a quarter, really a month or so, where inflation went up, and now we had one really good inflation reading and one pretty good one. We just need to see more so that confidence rises. I'm not going to
Are we weeks away, months away?
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to try to avoid sending any really specific signals about time today because it's going to depend on the data. It also matters what's going on in the labor market, though. We've also said that if the labor market weakens unexpectedly, that could be a case for loosening policy as well. Really, we're weighing both those factors.
All right, I'll just jump right in. Get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so he talked about a pretty good inflation report or two, and the Fed wanting to see more. Well, there you go. You just got another one. So anyone listening to that, it's you don't even need to read between the tea leaves. It's like the Fed, Jerome Powell is saying we need more good inflation data, and we just got another good print. So unless something unexpected happens between now and September, it really is hard to make a case against a rate cut in September. And it also is astonishing that we came into this year, or at least the futures traders who make bets on how many rate cuts or interest rates, they came into the year expecting 6 rate cuts, and
Yeah.
now it looks like we're getting maybe 1, uh,
Yeah.
2 maybe if we're lucky. So just a reminder there that things can change very quickly, but July to September is not a very long time, and it's kind of hard to see the trend swinging violently the other way. So if what Powell wanted was another good inflation report, then this is the answer to that.
And let's put this into perspective because I always want to look at inflation. I always want to look at rate cuts and everything else in the lens of how does this affect everyday people? Inflation's very obvious. For too long of a time now, people have been spending too much to get their basic necessities. And it has been really crunching wallets. We've been seeing credit card debt go up. We've been seeing delinquencies go up. The strains are there on the consumer. And just because we talk about inflation softening and we cheer on these good reports like the one we're seeing today, again, 3% is the inflation number year over year for CPI. So I just want to keep reiterating that if people are joining us a little bit later. A good inflation report, price is still up 3% over the past year, but more than that, it's been compounded over all of those raises before. Can you talk to me about this? Because people would love to see prices go down, but there's actually a huge danger to deflation. That's not something that the Fed or any economist would want to see, even though people are saying, hey, I'm spending 20% more over the course of a couple of years. Why won't they
Yeah,
see prices go backwards?
and you raised 2 excellent points, and I'll start with the last one on deflation. Deflation, you don't want to see deflation basically because that if businesses start to cut prices aggressively, then it's usually because people aren't spending. And if people aren't spending, consumer spending is like 2/3 of the economy. So if that's the reason why prices start to fall dramatically, then you don't want that because then that means we are sort of knocking on recession's door essentially. So that's one thing. Also, unfortunately, it's very rare to see prices, fall after you've had an inflationary burst like this. I'm sure we all have, people in our families, whether it's parents or grandparents or older people who say, I remember when a loaf of bread was 50 cents or what have you. Like it never happens that prices go all the way up, and then bread all of a sudden costs 50 cents again. So
Right.
what tends to happen is that wages catch up to or exceed inflation, and then we all move on. But you make an excellent point about how does for average normal everyday people, including you and I, we can sit here and talk about a good inflation print, but the reality is that people are paying more for everything, and it still stings. It still hurts to think about how much you're spending on bread or eggs or gas or what have you, 2, 3 years ago, and how much it costs now.
Yeah.
Even though the rate of change of prices is falling, the absolute level of prices, what you see in the grocery store, is still pretty high. And so it may not be as good news for the average consumer as it is for the economist behind the terminal, crunching numbers, because we're still paying a heck of a lot more for everyday goods and services than we were a year ago, 2 or 3 years ago. So, like I said, it's rare for prices to come down dramatically, and in fact, you don't want that because that's often a signal that the economy is not doing great. But the equalizer is then wage growth, and whether we see people's wages catch up to or exceed the level of inflation that we've had.
And in the last year, we have seen wages outpace inflation. So there is that game of catch up going on. The tables have turned in that sense. The graph is changing. So in that way, that pace would just need to continue. Of course, the Fed was worried about wages for some time because they were seeing that as being inflationary too. I want to focus in more on this shelter number, just seeing the softening there. Shelter is notoriously this lagging indicator. And for people watching, what that means is that what's happening in the economy, what's happening with shelter prices is going to take longer to sink in, essentially. And now we're getting that first taste of a softening in the shelter index, where this is more than a third of the weight of the entire consumer price number. So when we talk about what inflation is, the headline inflation, shelter is 36% of the whole thing. So it's a huge number because we know it's a huge part of our expense. So going back to that, and this idea that shelter is this lagging indicator, I mean, are we going to start to see a cliff, a real slip down?
We may, and again, it's like that. That's a great observation that it is lagging, and so some of what we're seeing, does not reflect, may not reflect the full trend that already transpired up until the end of last month, and so it is possible that we start to see that component fall meaningfully. Especially if home prices or rent, follow suit. If we do start to see more people willing to list their homes for sale because they think rates are going to fall, or because rates actually do begin to fall, then that may have an impact on home prices. It may have an impact on rent, and so absolutely, there may be more to come in terms of that drop in shelter prices, because like you say, it's lagging.
And that will be directly tied, the mortgage rates at least, to what actions the Fed takes. But let's again talk more about how this is really impacting people, because you mentioned the people behind the terminal. All of us really analyzing these data numbers every single time, and we get super excited. We've been talking, it's July now, we're still talking and waiting for that rate cut, right? And we're talking about the same rate cut that we've been anticipating all year long.
Right.
This rate cut, given the rate environment that people were living in post 2008 recession until really post COVID and all of this inflation action, we've been really used to a very low interest rate environment for quite a long time, and now we're at a pretty high level. This rate cut, while we can write any number of articles about it, that quarter point isn't going to affect people that much. They're not going to see it that much, right? Or will there be any kind of relief except for the stock market's loving it?
Excellent point. I mean, the stock markets will love it because, I think it's more of a psychological impact than an actual impact on people's pocketbooks. Just the idea that the Fed is willing to ease conditions um, would be, I think it's more of it's about the signal that it sends about the trend and about the economy and the fact that, look, we had, uh, you know, several months to a year plus of really painful price increases and the Fed, aggressively hiked rates, its most aggressive hiking campaign in decades. And then
Hmm.
now they're at the point where they're saying, we can not only pause like we have for the last couple of months, so it can actually be used to unwind some of that. So for the market, it's definitely, um, you know, I think it's for the market and for consumers, it's psychological. But you're right. It's if we get a rate cut, it'll be 25 basis points to a range of 5 to 5.25%. For much of the post Great Recession period, we were at 0 to 0.25%. So it's still really high. And just before we came on, I was running some numbers in one of these calculators that if you are taking out if you're buying a $40,000 car, say you put $10,000 down with an 8% rate, your monthly payment, well, in New Jersey, plus sales tax and all of that, comes out to $608. 7.75%, so that's 25 basis points off that 8% rate, gets you to 594. So that's a whopping savings of about, what, $15? So even if you decided, oh, the Fed cut rates, I'm going to go out and refinance my car loan, unless your credit profile has improved significantly, you probably won't, be seeing like a massive savings. It's going to take a couple of percentage points of lower rates for, those savings to really add up. Or, of course, if we're talking about a house, then, the bigger numbers will mean bigger savings as rates come down. I just used the car for illustration, but yeah, great to put in perspective that 25 basis points is not that much of a rate cut,
Hmm.
and 5%, the 5% Fed funds rate is still significantly higher than we were um, some years ago. But then, I think if we were being honest, we all knew that 0% interest rates were, that wasn't going to be the new normal. So this is sort of back to reality.
Yeah. Well, I really appreciate you crunching the numbers and putting that into perspective because that is how it really affects people. And this idea, I mean, you could put that on a wall right there where you're talking about it's more of a psychological impact, not an impact on the pocketbook. And to your point, I think there's a lot of conversations looking back over the past 15 years or so, probably more, looking at how low interest rates were from a regular, everyday perspective. And that's just, I don't think moving forward that's going to be the reality. I do think the Fed is going to keep things higher than we were used to post 2008 recession because it just took so long for them to start to regulate it after that. And the argument being that it took them too long and we got really used to this low interest rate environment. So there's certainly a lot of shocks going on, but I'm very grateful that you've been with us to be able to talk through it all. I want to just run down the numbers again because I don't want to minimize this deflationary number in June of negative 0.1% for the month. That's the first time in a very, very, very long time that we're seeing that kind of number. And 3% for the CPI for year over year. So prices rising 3% in this basket of goods that is measured by the Consumer Price Index over the year. So thank you so much for coming on and talking to us, Akin Oyedele, Deputy Editor of Investing at Business Insider. It's been such a pleasure.
Thanks for having me. It's been great.